Hey guys, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a little trick I like to do just to make sure that the valve train is working as it should after a cam swap. This is my wife's 6.2 GMC Yukon Denali XL. We just put the cam that was in the turbo Jeep. It's a Texas Speed 228, 600 lift, 112 LSA. Going in this is a 6.2 Jeep is as well. So I put that cam in here, and the stock push rods that I was gonna use were way too short. The cam base circle is quite a bit smaller than the stock cam, and most of those aftermarket cams are. So I actually mic'd a few stock cams. I have one from the Yukon, one from the Jeep. We had a couple more that my daughter and her friend made some table lamps out of, and they all mic about the same. And then this Texas Speed cam, they obviously just take that cam and they grind a different profile into it with a different base circle, and then you're supposed to find the length push rods that you need for whatever it is that you're doing. Obviously that changes with head gasket thickness, deck height, head resurfacing, what type of lifters, a couple other variables, but it's definitely important that you check. Don't just slap the shit together and then complain about the rattling noises and any other issues that you might have. If you have push rods that are too short, not only will there be rattling noises, but you won't get to utilize the full stroke of the cam lobes. So make sure you got it right. And I would err on the side of higher preload on the lifters instead of lower if you're looking for a quieter idle. So the lifters in these things, especially like the LS7 lifters that everyone uses, they have quite a bit of available preload before they are completely bottomed out and become solid lifters. And you want to definitely get into that. So basically, just to go over it briefly, a good way to check zero lash, you don't need any special tools or anything, but just stick a push rod in that the length of. Like I had the 7.4 from Texas Speed. Stick a push rod in that the length of. Run the bolt on the rocker arm down on a closed valve until it just gets snug enough so you can't rattle this up and down. And don't pull super hard on this just to try to verify that, because if your lifter has bled out the oil, you're going to be able to move this up. If you pull hard, you'll be able to feel the little bit of sponginess in the lifter. That's what they do. They should bleed out their oil. Not super fast, but they bleed out, and they'll all be slightly different, depends on the bleed out rate of each one. And some people get carried away with the bleed out rate being super critical and stuff, but it's not. As long as they're not collapsed, they'll build oil, and they return to the top with a spring. So just lightly snug it down. Once it's snugged, then there is a method for turning this bolt X amount of times to its torque value. I think it's like it should be 1.5 to 2.5 turns or something like that. What I did is I put a push rod in that I knew was too short, and then I snugged this bolt down the same way. And actually, since it was too short, with this bolt torqued, there was still rattly. Like I could move it up and down a little bit. So I took a feeler gauge and I actually mic'd that gap to zero lash. So I stuck feeler gauges in here until that up and down motion went away. And I checked a bunch of them on both sides, and I wrote down that measurement. And it was like, with the 7.40s, I had like 17 thousandths, 25 thousandths in a couple spots. A little tiny bit different, which is not abnormal. And then I took that measurement and I checked the base circle of the cam I put in, against the base circle of the cam that I had pulled out. Divide it in half so you have the difference in size and cam radius. And in case you're not familiar with what I mean, or what a base circle is, if you're looking at a cam, it has the profile of the lobes, the egg shape, I guess the skinnier side of the egg, but most of the lobe is one radius. So like the majority of this lobe, for example, I don't know why I'm having focusing issues, but like the majority of this lobe here is round. All the way up to about halfway here, this whole section is the same radius up until it starts to narrow and elongate here. So what you do is you take a caliper and you just mic it right here before it starts to get small. Check that, and then you divide it by 2, and that's your base circle radius. And basically that means that when the valve is closed, your lifter will be in such a position on that base circle that the valve will actually be closed and the lifter should have X amount of preload. Now that's where it comes in. That's where that whole idea of how much preload should there be. If you run a smaller amount of preload, then your lifter has to completely expand. You're only compressing it this much every time it goes through a stroke. I mean, obviously when the valve opens, the spring, the push rod gets shoved up into the lifter. Excuse me, the lifter gets shoved up into the push rod. The plunger goes down, but then once you get to the base circle area, it almost opens all the way up, and that there's just no tension then on the push rod. And now this might just be opinion, but since there isn't any tension, say the lifter, just imagine if there was 0 preload, the lifter would completely spring open, allowing there to be no preload on it, and then the push rod, as it comes slamming up, wouldn't have any tension on it, so it would be loose enough. And with the the rotation of the engine and the push rod going up and down and up and down in the hole, you're going to have some valve train noise there. Also, it's not going to put any tension on the back side of the rocker arm into this spring, allowing the rocker arms to also have some ambient rattling noises. And I'm certain that that's a lot of what people hear, when they hear that startup rattling, and even a lot of these engines make quite a bit of valve train noise without that. So you'll have to check on the specific ones. It's easy to Google it, but I know like the LS7 lifters have like I want to say it's like 200 thousandths, like literally 0.2, I think, of travel in the lifter that you can use for preload. Where like factory specs, they go like I want to say they go like 0.02 to like 0.08 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but that's pretty close. And you can go over 0.1, or maybe it's off a little bit. I'd have to check that out, I guess, but I wrote all this stuff down. But anyway, I guess to put it simply, when I checked that out, a 7.400 push rod was short, and the biggest gap I had was it was 25 thousandths. So I would have had to add 25 thousandths to get 0 lash, and I went with so that would have been a push rod that was 7.425 would have had 0 lash on the worst one, the biggest gap, and the rest would have had some preload at that point, because all of the rest of them had a significantly less gap. And my best one with a 7.400 had 0 lash, and that was like up front right here. Like these two, I think they both were 7.4 push rod, gave them 0 lash. So with a 7.425, I already had 25 thousandths preload. So because of the varying measurements that I got, I actually went with a 7.450 because that's going to give these ones 50 thousandths preload, and it's going to give the rest anywhere below that, but no less than 25 thousandths preload. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of stuff. But what I really wanted to show you was, now that it's all installed, what I like to do to make sure that the valves are closing as they should, which you can watch and see as you tighten these down to make sure that you are, when this is tightening, say this valve is open, it's hard to see, but if you get both of these valves closed, rotate the engine over so both of these valves are closed in a compression cycle, you can tighten this down and watch the back drop down as it compresses the lifter. And it should not compress this spring. If it does, you've bottomed out the stroke in the lifter and it's opening this valve. Now, you might be able to visually see that if it's bad, but it's impossible to know for sure unless you run the engine. And then, of course, in a compression stroke, you run the risk, if there's a valve open a smidge here and you have already tight PTV, you may end up smacking this valve on the piston the first time out, especially with a cam that has a higher lift, a significantly higher lift than a stock cam, and maybe even flat top pistons that don't have any valve reliefs cut in them. So what I do, and I have this one already set up for it, is I take my compression tester fitting and I actually thread in an 8th NPT female air chuck, so I can take my air chuck here and snap it in that thing. I don't know why focusing is being so difficult here. So anyway, I thread that compression tester fitting with the air chuck, the male air chuck side into the cylinder, and all I do is I take and I snap that together, and once it's snapped together, there's air flowing in there right now. Now, I can hear air currently coming in through the intake, which means that the intake valve is open. So the air is flowing past it. So then what I do, and I gotta find the tool here. Let's see, where did it go? There it is. I've got the dampener bolt in place. I will take, let me set this down here so you can kind of see what's going on. I'll put this over here. I will take my socket and put it on the dampener bolt, and I'll rotate this over. See what happens there? I rotate that over. You can see that intake valve come completely shut. You can hear that little bit of hissing. That's not leaking through the valves. That's actually that fitting, because it's not actually an 8th NPT fitting on the end of that. So I put a bunch of Teflon on it. It's still leaking there, but when I rotate it over and close that intake valve, there's no longer any air bleeding into the intake or through the exhaust. And I can't even rotate this any further by hand, because right now there's 40 pounds of air pressure in that cylinder. So when I let go of this, it like pops back open and that intake valve opens back up. It's actually forcing the stroke of the piston back down backwards and allowing the intake valve to open back up so that it can relieve that pressure. But like I said, by hand, I can rotate this over and close the intake valve and verify that with all this stuff tightened and torqued, I am not over compressing the lifter and opening the intake valve. If I was, the lifter would be bottomed out, and even with me hand rotating this over, that intake valve would be open just enough where I would be able to audibly recognize air coming back through the intake like this. And even if I try to close that a little bit, it is very obvious when that's open. So that's the trick. It's just a neat little quick method to verify that everything is good to go. And obviously something else that you'll do is you'll just hand rotate this over a few times and make sure that there's nothing hidden, nothing binding, and there shouldn't be. And even that won't 100% guarantee that you're not going to have piston to valve clearance issues. But because with the engine spinning faster, there is elongation in parts and slight differences in reaction time for hydraulic lifters and the valve train and stuff like that. But you shouldn't have to worry about piston to valve clearance issues unless you're going with some crazy high lift thing and flat top pistons and decked parts and stuff, especially not for this LS. I guess I can't speak for the rest of the engine world, but this is a stage 3. This is sloppy. Oh no, this is the Texas Speed Cam. The Jeep just finished having a sloppy stage 3 installed into it, which is a substantially more aggressive cam. It's actually just a smidge. It's like 5/1000ths lower lift, so it's still essentially a 0.600 lift cam, but the intake and exhaust durations are substantially longer. So it woke it up quite a bit. This is going to be an awesome cam for this truck. Should substantially increase torque through the whole range, and yeah, make it drive like a little hot rod. It's getting a muffler delete. Should be pretty slick. There it is in all its glory. Wife's little 450 horse hot rod. Honestly, I have no idea how much power it'll make, but we are going to have it on the dyno pretty soon, so stick around for that. Again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you can continue to watch this crap that I upload. Give the video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends and your family. Tell everybody how much you enjoy these videos and how you just can't live without them. So anyway, that'll be it for now. Thanks for watching. See you guys later.